Have you ever looked up at the sky and suddenly remembered something from when you were a kid? That happened to me recently. I was traveling to Barrie to visit my mother, and somewhere along the way, I happened to look up at the sky. And there they were, rain dogs. Now, I don't even know if everybody calls them that, but maybe that was something people called them where I grew up. Or maybe it was just something passed down through families. But when I was a kid, that's what I knew them as, rain dogs. You know those long streaks you sometimes see coming down from the clouds? Sometimes they almost look as though they're reaching from the earth right up into the sky. I remember being told when I was young that they were drawing the water up from the earth. That was how rain was made, or at least that was the explanation I understood as a child. The water was being drawn up into those clouds, and eventually it would come back down again as rain. And when you're little, you don't question those things, do you? Someone older tells you something about the world and you just accept it. Why wouldn't you? They're the adults. Surely they know. But there I was all these years later, traveling to Barrie, looking up at those rain dogs again, and I suddenly remembered that little girl who believed the sky was pulling water upward. And then my mind went somewhere completely different. I started looking at those streaks and I thought, what if I didn't imagine water being drawn upward at all? What if I imagined souls? I don't even know where that thought came from. It was just suddenly there. I could picture all those souls who had recently left this earth traveling upward together. And then my imagination took it even further. What if they weren't traveling alone? What if somewhere beyond those clouds there were angels singing, calling them upward? Can you imagine that? Not somebody dying and then suddenly finding themselves alone somewhere, frightened and wondering where to go. Instead, imagine being welcome. Imagine hearing something beautiful calling you toward it. Imagine all those souls rising together and angels singing as if to say, "Come this way, you're home now." I know that's my imagination. I'm not trying to tell anyone that this is what happens when we die, because how could I possibly know? None of us really knows. But standing there looking at the sky, I remember thinking, what a beautiful vision. And then another question came into my head. Why would I want to take that away from myself? Because I'm an adult now, and I understand that there are scientific explanations for what happens in the atmosphere. I understand that rain doesn't happen because something in the sky is literally reaching down and sucking water upward. But does knowing that mean I have to stop imagining? Does understanding what something is mean I have to give up what it means to me? I don't think it does. And maybe that's something we lose a little bit as we get older. Think about the things you believed when you were a child. Did you ever sit in the back seat of a car at night and think the moon was following you? I remember looking out the window, and there it would be, The car would turn a corner, and somehow the moon would still be there. We would travel another mile, and it would still be following along. Then eventually you grow up, and somebody explains distance and perspective, and suddenly you know why the moon appeared to follow you. But here's what I wonder. Was knowing the answer really better than believing for a little while that the moon was keeping you company? I'm not saying we shouldn't learn. Of course we should. I'm curious about things I like understanding, how things work. But why does one have to cancel out the other? Why can't I understand the science and still look at something with wonder? Maybe I can look at the sky and know exactly what is happening with the clouds and moisture and sunlight and still allow another part of me to say, but look at that. Doesn't it look like something more? Because the older I get, the more I think there are two different kinds of truth. There's the truth about what something physically is, and then there's the truth about what it makes me feel. Science might be able to explain what I'm seeing in that sky, but can science tell me what that sight has to mean to me? I don't think it can. And maybe it shouldn't. Because when I see rain dogs now, I don't think about water anymore. I think about people. Maybe that happens more as we get older because by this point in life, most of us have people who are missing. People we love who aren't sitting at the table anymore. People whose voices we can still hear in our minds. Have you ever had that happen? Someone has been gone for years and suddenly you remember exactly how they laughed. Or you can hear a particular expression they used to say. Sometimes you can even imagine sitting across from them having one more conversation. And I wonder if that's partly why human beings have always attached meaning to things in nature. Someone sees a cardinal and immediately thinks about someone they loved. Another person sees a butterfly and feels the same thing. Maybe it's a feather that appears somewhere unexpected. Maybe it's a certain star. Maybe it's a song that suddenly comes on the radio at exactly the moment you were thinking about someone. Now, could I explain every one of those things logically? Probably. The cardinal is a bird. The feather came from a bird. The song came on because somebody programmed a radio station or an algorithm selected it. But if that song makes somebody stop for 30 seconds and think about their father who has been gone for 20 years, does knowing how that song got there make that moment meaningless? Why should it? Maybe not everything meaningful has to be supernatural. And maybe not everything meaningful has to be proven. Sometimes perhaps it's simply about the connection we make with something. That's what rain dogs have become for me. They started as a childhood explanation for rain, and somewhere along the way, they became something else. Now, when I see those streaks reaching up into the sky, I imagine souls traveling home. And I imagine angels singing them upward. Is that really what's happening? I have absolutely no idea. But I'll tell you something. I like the thought. And at this age, I don't feel the need to argue myself out of every beautiful thought simply because I can't prove it. Maybe mystery isn't always something that needs to be solved. Maybe sometimes it's okay to just stand there and wonder. And you know what else crossed my mind? Someday I'm going to be one of those people who is missing from somebody's life that's just part of being alive. And I found myself thinking that maybe someday someone who knew me will look up and see those same rain dogs. Maybe they'll remember me talking about them. And maybe for just a second, they'll think, there goes Carol Ann. I actually kind of like that. Not because I expect anyone to literally believe they're watching my soul travel through a cloud, but because for one little moment, they might stop what they're doing. They might look up, they might smile, and they might remember me. Isn't that really what so many of these little signs become? Maybe they're not proof of anything, and maybe they're simply places for our memories to land. And that brings me back to the little girl who was told those rain dogs were drawing water up into the sky. She didn't understand evaporation or atmospheric science. She just looked up and believed something mysterious was happening above her. All these years later, I understand a lot more about the world than she did. But I'm beginning to think I don't want to completely lose her either. Because maybe growing older doesn't have to mean explaining every bit of wonder out of life. Maybe wisdom isn't knowing that the magic isn't real. Maybe part of wisdom is knowing the difference between something being literally true and something being meaningful, and allowing both to exist. So now I'm curious about you. Is there something you believed when you were little that you know isn't actually true, but a small part of you still holds on to it anyway? Maybe it's something in the sky. Maybe it's something your grandmother told you. Maybe it's a superstition, a story, a little family belief that makes absolutely no sense when you examine it too closely. But does it make you smile? Does it bring somebody back to you for a moment? Does it make this enormous, complicated world feel just a tiny bit more mysterious? Because if it does, maybe we don't have to be in such a hurry to explain it away. Maybe sometimes it's enough to look up at the sky and wonder. And the next time I see rain dogs, I already know what I'm going to see. I'm going to see souls traveling home, with the angels singing them upward. And I think I'm going to keep that one.